Okay, our next presentation is going to focus on design for trust, transparency, and control. And it comes to us today from the data strategist from Facebook. So please give a round of applause for Dr. Dan Hayden from Facebook. Hey.
Thank you. Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining me. I have to apologize first. Ich spreche nicht Deutsch, so you'll have to bear with me. I'll do my best to make the job easy for the translators. So I do apologize. I'm going to come and talk to you about a couple of things today, a project we've been working on around the issue of how do we introduce a more customer-centric approach to designing for trust, transparency, and control of data. Now, obviously, the events of the last few months surrounding Facebook have had a really profound effect on how we're thinking about this. And we've instituted a number of changes to our platform, to our policies that you can read about in our newsroom posts and in the kind of communications that Mark has offered. But today I'm going to talk about something that's a bit more big picture, that reflects the wider kind of industry position and the work that we all need to do, from the smallest startups to the biggest companies. And this is a project that we actually kicked off probably about 14 or 15 months ago in Berlin. So it was founded and started in Germany and has since been working around the world. And we've been evolving it recently, and I'm pleased to talk to you today about where we've been taking that work and where we're going next. So I'm going to speak about 4 things. First, the big challenge of how we make a really customer-centric, people-centric experience of data and of data sharing. The approach we've been using, what we've actually doing about it, how we scale it, so how we can make that touch more people, a wider variety of problems, and then finally, the tools, the practical tools that maybe might be of use to you or to others here at CBIT or in the world. So I'm going to start first with a big picture, a little picture of the world as it is, and one that you know pretty well, because you here attending CBIT are probably pretty close to these kinds of problems. We live in an increasingly connected world, full of digital services, amazing apps that we can use, from mapping apps that can tell us how much traffic there is on our commute home, to weather apps, which, if you're Irish like me, is amazing to know it's going to rain in 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, and it's something we really love. To amazing virtual environments that you can inhabit and that can really trick the mind. But there's a challenge, because as the sophistication of those digital services has increased, and they've become more and more useful and and bigger part of our lives, the tools that we've developed to explain how those services work, for people to feel in control of them, for people to understand what's happening behind the scenes, haven't kept up. So we have complexity, but then not as much understanding of the back end, and that creates uncertainty for people. And this is a really big challenge. It was almost, I think, 50 years ago, Arthur C. Clarke penned this quote: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And we're all kind of familiar with that. At least for English speakers, it's repeated really often. It comes up a lot. But there's something interesting about this if you think about it. If technology is indistinguishable from magic, what does that mean? There's a good side of it, like magical things can be fun and interesting and can definitely astound the senses. But they can also create uncertainty, a feeling of a lack of control, a sense of concern people have, maybe rightly, about things they don't quite understand, even as it offers them lots of valuable things. And if we as digital technologists, as businesses, kind of continue to charge forward into a digital world, but one where people don't really feel that sense of control, of transparency, like they have a grip on things, we're running a really big risk. And that's a big risk that is shared across every kind of digital service. So let me go back a little bit again to the history of UX. So the history of designing user experiences. What we think of now is data-driven services, but back then, we're just computers. How many of you are familiar with this interface? Can I see a few hands? Without making you feel old, you might have seen pictures in magazines. Although if you're reading magazines, it still makes you a little bit older. what's actually happening here, right? So it's a pretty simple interface. It's very stark. There's not a lot happening. It's not like super astounding the senses. I wouldn't say it's magical necessarily. Might have been at the time. But there's something interesting happening. We have this blinking cursor, the one animation in the experience, right? A black screen and a blinking cursor. What's the blinking cursor telling us? It actually tells us a few things. It tells us that this is where the machine expects input, so where we can interact with it. It tells us that the machine is working, it hasn't frozen, that it's turned on. So it's giving us some feedback, even as it's inviting input. Now let's go forward a few more years. How many of you are familiar with this interface? It's not a great experience, right? You're waiting for information to download, your app has frozen, and you've got this spinning wheel or an hourglass. And I think I have a lot of empathy for this, because all those times that you tried to use a digital service, and you had an hourglass, you could move around the screen, but you couldn't click on anything, and the frustration that was part of that. But equally, it's also telling us something. It's telling us we're downloading information, wait, it hasn't frozen, machine is on, downloading, working, processing, giving some feedback, some reassurance. Now let's go to a modern UX of a mobile app. And we have a much more interesting, much more dynamic experience. You have information loading from the top to the bottom, because people read from top to bottom. So you should take the first piece of information before the last. You have these kind of skeleton frameworks to say that text is coming in here, that images are going to arrive here. So wait, bear with us. That you have the headers and the structure coming in ahead of time to say, this is the page you're on, this is the title, information is coming. Now, it's kind of the same as what we have over here, but more dynamic, more people-centric. It reflects the concerns somebody has. Where am I? What's going to happen? What information do I expect? What will I get first? And it maybe is thinking ahead a little bit. Now, it's easy to look at this now and say, that's really obvious, right? That any brilliant designer back in the 1980s could have just imagined this, sketched it on paper, and would have realized it. But it's not the case. This is the product of decades of experimentation, failure, good ideas that have seen fruit and been spread across the industry, bad ideas that were tried and failed, lots and lots of feedback from people, lots of successful services and not so successful services. But if we were to look at, in contrast to this evolution over the last 40 or 50 years, to look at the area of data transparency, how we communicate to people about how their services work, do you think we're more on the left-hand side of the screen or on the right? What do you think? Can I get a point that way or point this way? So a little bit of difference. But I think, to be honest, like, we have quite legalistic language. It's not very dynamic. It doesn't really think ahead of what people's concerns are. I think it's fair to say we're probably much more on this side of the screen, and we haven't seen the same evolution. But as technology becomes even more complex, we really need to see a shift, right? We need to see more innovation, more new approaches, more people-centric designs. How do we do that? And even the kind of really well-intentioned efforts to address this have been kind of a mix of success and failure. So if you look at cookie banners on websites in the EU, or if you look at the recent emails you've probably all gotten about GDPR, there's lots of good stuff there. Like, there's lots of really helpful information, but it's also a lot, right? You're getting a lot of information, and it's hard to digest still, and sometimes very legalistic. So this probably isn't the answer to address, at least fully, the question about like user centricity, people centricity, the experience. And as you've seen that shift from desktop to mobile, we see increasing constraints. So on a desktop screen, you have lots of space to work with, space for text. People are sitting down, and they have what you might think of as like computer sessions. So they might sit down, kind of like you'd watch TV, and you're in front of a screen for a while. But nowadays, people have their phones on them all the time. They're taking them out from quick snatches of their pocket for 30 seconds at a time. They're trying to achieve an action, whether that's going somewhere, communicating with somebody, getting some information. And they're interacting really, really differently. And that's constrained the space people have, the time. Our expectations for how long things take to load have really, really decreased. So if 20 years ago, you're using a computer, and you get on a web page, and it takes 2 minutes. You'll sit there. You're like, OK, this is how long it takes to get a web page. This is how long it takes to get on Wikipedia. Now, if it doesn't work in a few seconds, you're gone. The next thing. Where can I find a better signal? Where can I get onto Wi-Fi? Where can I access this service in a different way, a different service? So really different constraints. And that's just over the last couple of years. Look at what's happening next. We have a shift to VR, driverless cars, wearables, voice interfaces. How do we think about how we communicate to people how their data is used in all these new and maybe even more challenging experiences, contexts, and change that, for instance, in voice or VR? We don't really have models that address that yet. So it's about to get even more complicated. So what we've been doing is looking at all the range of different people and different kinds of experiences and disciplines that need to work together on this. Because if your approach to data transparency is driven completely by compliance, responding to what lawyers are looking for, you're probably not going to be very successful. Because lawyers are great, they really understand the law, but they're not product makers, they're not about digital experiences, they're not really focused or skilled in those areas. We need to think about lawyers, policymakers, product makers, design UX, marketers, researchers, and really get to grips with what is the person at the heart of this experience, and what do they expect, what can they understand, how do we do that over time among different contexts, different experiences? It's a big problem to solve. And then we need to do it in a way that looks ahead to the future, looks at all those new interfaces, how that feels when we're in a voice interface, how it feels when you're in a wearable or in a ubiquitous IoT and it's connected devices in your home that don't have a screen or even have a voice interface. Those are all big challenges. So we've been taking that kind of problem and thinking about it at Facebook. And we don't have really the whole answer at all. It's the start of a long journey, I think, that will continue forever as new interfaces keep being designed. But we've had this concept of hacking at Facebook for a very long time. It's part of the DNA of Facebook. Lots of services and products that Facebook makes that you probably use and enjoy were initiated at hacks. And we've complemented that with what we call design jams, which is where we take that idea of hacks and user interface kind of approaches and complement it with an external look. So we say, who are the people outside of the company in other disciplines, other companies, other areas who should be looking at this together with Facebookers, but across the industry, across many different companies. So we run these sprints or hacks or jams through 4 phases: discover, define, develop, and deliver, the 4 Ds of design thinking. Initially looking at the problem and trying to understand it as much as possible. And then framing, defining what the challenge is, setting out a problem definition, a design brief, before then working on delivery and trying to create a solution together. So not a compliance angle, but instead saying, what do all these different disciplines and experiences have to offer together? I'm going to take you through each of these in kind of phases. So discover first is where we try to kind of bring the level of knowledge up for the whole group. So you might have expert talks from different perspectives, different disciplines, different companies who are interested in the problem. We'll have design exercises to try to get people involved, have designers think about the legal perspective, have lawyers think about the design perspective, and have data protection experts, privacy specialists, policymakers give their points of view. So share as much into the room in one go as possible to try to work toward a better solution. Next, we define. So we take all that knowledge and say, OK, what are we learning from this? What do we understand that the challenge is? And try to really clearly define a problem set and say, this is the thing that we should try to work to solve today. We'll have diverse teams, so 6 to 8 people, all from different disciplines, maybe 2 designers working with 2 lawyers, working with a product manager, working with people from startups, people from wider industry across different fields, trying to tackle a challenge in a single day. Next, working on developing that, so sketching on paper, usually trying to focus really on the people problem. So if we think about that idea of people centricity, how do you actually bring that person into the room? whether it's through bringing in interviews, personas, lots of design tools we've created to help people to really focus on this is the person at the center of this challenge, something that in this area is kind of lacking. And then the teams will critique each other. So work through a day, sketch their ideas on paper, and then one team will present their initial ideas to another and say, what works about this? What are the challenges? Where could we improve on it? What's functional here, and what should we throw away? Try to refine the problem down. And then in the final stage, deliver, the teams work on digital prototypes. Now, for many of you here, if you work in kind of digital technologies and you work with technologists all the time, seeing somebody or working with someone to create UX designs really quickly, sketching and turning that into a digital interface, creating working prototypes of flows, that might be very natural and normal to you. But in lots of disciplines, it's actually really unusual. So if you think about how lawyers usually work, they're not thinking about how they can prototype and test their kind of novel ideas. They're usually thinking about the kind of process of documentation. And we bring that expert knowledge together with people who can realize prototypes quickly and start saying, what works about this, what doesn't, what can we test? And in the course of a single day with really expert people, you can really go from initial ideas and concepts all the way to working interactions, digital flows, experiences that look a lot like live apps or live experiences. And if we go back all the way to that initial kind of problem that we were looking at, what's the evolution been of data transparency across the industry? It's about that experimentation, not about there's one single idea that's going to solve this, but what can we offer that maybe pushes the ball forward a little bit in one specific context for one kind of user, and that addresses a problem, and that maybe we can experiment with and test. And we haven't been doing this alone, so this is really important. We've worked with more than 60 other companies, from global brands that you'll be very familiar with, to small startups who are working on novel problems, more than 50 different kind of policy and academic organizations, 25 different design partners, from small design agencies to very large ones who have different perspectives on the problem and different sets of skills to bring to bear. And we've traveled all over the world, from the pilot here in Germany, in Berlin, to London, Brussels, Dublin, Sao Paulo, to Hong Kong, back to Paris again, I think to more than 12 cities now with larger and smaller events, drawing on the local design communities, the different perspectives, and of course, the different kind of cultural approaches there are to some of these problems. Because people can have quite different experiences. Just as people in Germany have different kind of approaches to people in London or in Paris, or indeed in Hong Kong, to some of these kinds of questions. But we know it's not enough. So if I come and speak to you today about these interesting pieces of work we're doing, and you might well say, well, that's fine, good for you. It would be nice to participate sometime, and I hope you might be able to. But does that really address the big picture? And of course, we know that it's really important that we share these ideas, we share the kind of project, and invite others to join us in a much more meaningful way. And that's why just a month and a half ago at F8, which is Facebook's national or kind of international conference where we share new product ideas, we launched Ttc Labs, which is, sorry, I've got a little animation. Ttc Labs, which is the home for all of the learnings, designs, insights that are being generated at these workshops around the world across many different organizations. And we're sharing this all completely openly, and we're open sourcing the tools that we're applying to this so that others can use them as well, and hopefully maybe come up with new and better solutions, different approaches, and to similarly share that back as well. So I'm going to spend a few minutes taking you through the site, the kinds of tools, and especially with a focus on why it might be useful or relevant to you. So you can access the site now. It's live at ttclabs.net. It's an online resource to explore, develop new practices, designs. They're not meant to be like the single patterns that represent this is the way to do things, but different designs that represent new approaches. Some experiments, some things that are novel, some things that are iterations in a different way, all created at design jams by these collaborative groups. You can see designs. So these represent kind of a dive into different prototypes people created in our kind of design section. and you can read write-ups from the design teams that worked on them, exploring what motivated it, the kinds of personas they're trying to address, the kinds of challenges that that represents, and maybe some of the strengths and weaknesses of the designs. I'll give you an example. This is a prototype app called Fanfare, and it was created, I think, at the Dublin Design Jam, which is about 6 months ago, 7 months ago, and it's addressing a problem about how we use location or sensitive information to communicate to people how their service will improve or change. And it uses a natural kind of language and a human language to do that. So let me show you how it works. Fanfare is an app that allows you to find local concerts that might be of interest to you. And it's a fictional app, by the way, so we use these fictional apps to represent different use cases that need to be addressed or it could be solved for. And when you access the service, if this was you and you wanted to find a concert, and you went on your Fanfare app and found 103,000 upcoming gigs, it's not very useful, right? Like it's too much. You need to like cut through that. And there's a couple of ways to do that. So it asks, if we know your location, we can narrow down. So you can see gigs that are near me, which might be of interest. You can share your location, so whether it's just in the app or all the time. But as you progress through, you've now shared your location, and you can use this natural language to say, there are 252 upcoming gigs near you. You tap on near you can see back again to, what information did I share? Why did I do that? And again, if we know the music you're into, we can narrow even further. So connecting it to Spotify or iTunes or whatever service, you can again get a little bit more information. So now that I know where you are, so like what gigs are in your near location, plus the kind of music you're interested in, I might have a bit more information that can give me relevant information, right? So 15 concerts, I'm kind of into a space where maybe I'm giving you something that's useful to you. But similarly, again, this single sentence at the top, 15 upcoming gigs near you, based on music you like, the ability to kind of tap back into that and understand how that information is generated, we're helping someone really understand how their data is helping to deliver the service that's of use to them in a really transparent way. And that's a big problem to solve. Similarly, connecting it to their contacts, we can see people nearby who are in their kind of friends or contacts list who are near them with interest in the same music and that your friends are going to. And you've got this kind of sense of like a clear value exchange, value offering to people, but that at any stage they can look back and see, okay, that's how my data is going to work for me. So that's one of, I think there are probably about 20 different prototype designs like this on the site. I'd encourage you to have a look. Some you might think are really interesting. Some you might think need a lot more work. Some we should just throw away. They're not created by Facebook. They're created by these collaborative groups. And I think there's a lot there to challenge maybe and understand, and that hopefully will help to drive some of these conversations forward. The Insights articles is the second section. And in this section, we invite experts. So whether that's from academia, like Margaret Hayden, who we've been doing some work with, who's the director of the D-School Stanford Legal Design Lab, contributing a piece about what it means to design for law and the challenges that offers. The approach we took to creating the workshop design for design jams, how you design for meaningful consent, but also inputs from industry partners, other companies that are using this approach, perspectives from Facebook designers and content strategists. So really a mix of different expert opinions on the problem, none having the only answer, but maybe offering something interesting. And then finally, the tool library. And this is something that's really interesting. So with this approach, we're not trying to stand up and say, these are the designs that should be used. Because there are so many different use cases, problems to solve. That's not the right approach. But what we are trying to do is say, what about this more collaborative way of coming up with new ideas, of bringing together the different disciplines that might have something to offer and asking them to work collaboratively to initiate new and innovative ideas and designs. And we've shared the kind of toolkits and templates that we've applied in design jams, totally open source. So you can take them up and use them in your organization, in your school, in your university, in your company for free. You can download them all today from the site. And they include lots of really interesting things. So the first is sets of design assets. So prototype materials and templates for, I think, about 15 or 20 different prototype apps and services, like, say, Munchbox, which is a prototype food delivery app. So you can download this. You can get the sketch files today, and maybe try and experiment and build a prototype yourself. So really encouraging and putting the tools in anyone's hands to say, if you have an idea for a new flow, a new user experience to work in this area, we're trying to give people as much as we can from our work to get them started. Or for Oink, which is a digital bank, and similarly, creating these screens that you can download and use. They might be useful if you're just looking to experiment in any other flow area, but we hope that people will use them to take on this problem of data transparency, trust, control of information, and helping people to understand that better in a people-centric way. The second big area is the kind of workshop materials. So if you do have a group of people who, again, in your company, in your startup, in your university, who want to try to tackle a problem around this, how do you get started? We've taken all the tools we've used at Design Jams. We have about, I think, 20 or 30 different tools, workshop designs, materials, and we offer them, again, open source that you can download and use, and that you can maybe take and improve, and that's definitely our hope. So an example is this tool, which, after running internal hacks and external jams, we have refined. It's a way to understand the kind of user data flow experience within your app. So it breaks down all the different data use cases. So in this trip sharing app, it includes things like passenger location history, passenger payment details, contact details, data sharing with a highway authority, and says, what if you think about all those different data use cases and start breaking down when you might talk to a person about them? What's the right time? What information should you ask for or inform people about upfront, so when they first download the app or service? What should you think about on the first time they use a particular element? So when you go on your app or you try to order a car, what information you should give, what you should offer in context. So when you try to use a particular part of the service, you're prompting people and giving them information about the service, or indeed, what information you should give on demand. So when people seek a control, maybe for some people who are really curious or want to really feel full control of the service, or because it's not super relevant information. And we need to address all those different use cases. In the kind of problem space at the moment, a lot of our focus is really on that upfront area. So it's really, really focused on how do I give people information when they first access the service. And it means that there's a lot of dense information when somebody's just starting to interact with your service. And for you, if you're product makers, you know that that can create a bit of a barrier. And for somebody using the service, it makes them feel uncertain. It makes them feel like they're not in control. So we, as an industry, really need to think carefully about how do we communicate at the right time, in the right context, in a way that can give people the best experience. And then finally, you can access the events page, where you can read about previous design jams, the results. You can learn about upcoming events. So we're roadmapping the next series of global events now. And if we're in your country, or indeed if you want to travel, you're very welcome to connect with us, log onto the website, contact us and join, and talk about how we could maybe work together. And there's one more thing, and I'm happy to say today in preparation for CeBIT, we've started to make the content available in German. So while I can't speak about it in German, at least if you're interested in this area, if you think the tools might be useful to you, we've started to translate the site, and that's available now at ttclabs.net. More work to do, obviously, but we hope to have the full site available in several languages and make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, because this is a really big problem to solve. So I think I'm just out of time. I really just say thank you for listening. If you want to contribute to this work, so if you're a company who wants to partner, a startup who thinks that they have an interesting offering, some perspective to give, an academic or a researcher who thinks they have something to add here and would like to maybe think about writing for the site or sharing their viewpoints, please do get in touch. This is not about one company, but about all companies and the many, many people interacting with our services and the job we have to do together to create a better experience for them. So thank you very much.
Dan, thank you very much. Yeah, well, you used your time perfectly. That's great. That's great. Good. So give Dan a round of applause. That was perfect. Thank you, Dan. Thank you.